Are electric vehicles about to become more affordable in Australia after the budget?
And what are the do's and don't do's of getting solar power into your home?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, the award-winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, joined, as always, by Adam Turner. Hey Adam, this week, Danish scientists revealed a photonic chip that they say could download the entire internet.
Wait, guys, there is no time for this.
TV Blackbox's Steve Molk? How did you get in the virtual Vertical Hold studios?
I have come to you from the very recent past. I have bad news.
What, our kids turn out to be assholes?
Sooty? Is it Sooty? I never trusted that bear.
They're other franchises. Let's move on. We have an issue. Whovian fans across Australia are outraged that the BBC have broken a near 60-year relationship with the ABC, where they have always shown all of the Doctor Who on the ABC, but from the 60th anniversary specials in 2023, all 3 eps and beyond, you'll only be able to watch Doctor Who in Australia, the new stuff, on Disney+.
To borrow from another franchise.
No!
That is collectively what a whole bunch of people have said in the last few days. It's been really incredible to see people out themselves as Whovians and
I didn't think I needed an outing.
No.
Well, I wasn't suggesting that you did, Alex. We're moving beyond that. But others to stake their claim and suggest that it is more than the end of an era. It is the end of an ongoing love affair with the ABC because Doctor Who has always been on the ABC here in Australia.
But this is a global deal, right? Outside the UK, I would assume. So it wasn't just about us.
Well, yes, Doctor Who will always be on the BBC in the UK. That will never cease.
And Ireland,
everywhere else. Yeah, well, let's call it the Greater United Kingdom, such
And
that
Ireland.
isn't even
And
a
Ireland,
thing anymore.
The Irish will get
That's
very
right.
angry with us if we
Yes.
don't get that clear.
Depends on which part of Ireland we're talking about, sure.
Yep.
But yes, no, this is a House of Mouse deal for all of the other territories.
So, I mean, it's a really fascinating one to me, not just because I've got an obvious and clear Doctor Who bias, but also because I think, and Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but outside sports, where timeliness is kind of everything, we've had deals like Apple, I know, has got the baseball, and I think Amazon had that weird NFL Thursday deal a couple of years ago. But outside sport, this feels to me like it might be the first show that's doing broadcast on a terrestrial network and a streaming deal at the same time. I think it's always typically been, especially globally, I think it's always typically been broadcast first and then, maybe weeks or months later, right, here's the whole lot on Netflix or Amazon or Paramount or whatever.
There is a little bit of precedent in that Netflix have picked up broadcast series where they can't drop it outside the territory until it's aired in the US and Canada.
Like Star Trek,
I would say,
I think.
And I will look, without wanting to start any kind of global sci-fi war, as important as Star Trek is, I would say that Doctor Who kind of beats it on a level of importance.
I'm behind this argument, but I can totally see where the flames are already licking at our feet.
To quote a doctor, what? Anyway.
Well, so, I mean, you mentioned the just after broadcast thing for Netflix with Star Trek. What do we know about this deal in terms of what Disney Plus gets? Because if we look at what the ABC had, obviously it doesn't have any more, they could put an episode on iView. They could even broadcast, and they did once or twice. They could broadcast the minute the BBC stopped broadcasting, which was typically like 6 a.m. here for us real diehard fans. Do we know if Disney's getting that yet, or are they just getting the rights?
There is still more to come out of the detail of this deal. For example, we don't know for sure if Disney are getting the full back catalogue rights or only from the 60th anniversary special forward. So this could mean that if you want to watch both the old Doctors and the new Doctors, the ABC is still your home for Doctor Who. It's very likely Disney have signed the deal for all of it, but neither the Disney press release or the ABC's "We're sad to see you go, Doctor" press release said that either of them were getting or releasing the back catalogue.
So who's got the back catalogue at the moment if I want to watch those old Doctor Who's in Australia?
There's a whole bunch on ABC iView, and if you want to watch absolutely every episode that still exists of the Doctor, of course you want to jump over to BritBox. They have every Doctor Who episode that still remains in any kind of filmed format.
And I believe, and I could be wrong because it's been a little bit of time since I checked, but I believe Stan also had like a little grab bag of new Who episodes and the occasional old story as well. But
Yeah,
it was a
in and
real
out.
kind of curate's egg kind of thing.
Yeah, and unreliable. Like if you really wanted it, you'd go looking on the ABC.
Is this a package deal though? Like, are they taking Monkey and Metal Mickey and the Kenny Everett video show?
You're outing your age there, Mr. Turner.
We haven't heard. At the moment, this is only a Doctor Who exclusive, which is becoming more and more the case. Where there are big franchises, they're really only looking at doing single show deals.
The goodies that have to be next.
Well, who knows, mate?
The goodies, so that one I can answer. The goodies own their own rights because they put out, and this leads into the next question I was going to ask. This is beautiful. They put out a complete series box set through an agency a couple of years back. It's well worth tracking down, but you can only get it in the UK.
Confirm, just by the way, I can confirm that the goodies do put out.
Look, I'm not going there, Steve. But in terms of for the die-hard Whovians like myself, the other thing that this potentially imperils, of course, is physical media releases. And I know a lot of people are going to go, well, I don't care about physical media releases.
Sure.
Lots of Who fans do. They want everything sitting on a shelf so that actually it's kind of streaming deal secure. But again, we just don't know whether or not the Disney Plus deal is also going to lock those away such that there aren't Blu-ray or DVD releases of these shows either.
Oh, look, I would say to you that the BBC are pretty smart in the way they cut their deals, and I would not expect they have signed away the physical media rights for this exact reason.
So, Steve, we also just had a budget in which the government showed that it's not averse to technology, and we're going to detail that a little later in the show in certain other ways. Do you reckon I'd have any odds going to the government and saying, hey, can we put Doctor Who on the anti-siphoning list so that it can become like sport is not exclusive to a paid provider?
Look, you could have a red hot go. I think you'd have the slimmest of chances. You'd really need a high profile, I don't know, possibly even governor responsible for the media portfolio to be a Doctor Who fan for that to get close, because that's how, in part, the anti-siphoning list began. Thank you, Stephen Conroy.
That was going to be my question. Like, this, to be brutally honest, Doctor Who is as important to some people, and I'm looking at one of them right now, as sport as the AFL Grand Final is to other people.
Yes.
So, but we've drawn this arbitrary line that says this is worth protecting, but that's not. If you can't put Doctor Who on the anti-siphoning list, doesn't that sort of make a mockery of the whole concept of, but we'll decide who's important in this country and how it's shown here?
We will decide who watches what program and the method in which they watch it.
Yes.
Look, I think it's really a situation where, particularly because sport is a very, very broad church in our country, almost the priority religion after
almost the church
after being Anzacs. And I would offer that there are very few international sports grand finals, because that's ultimately what we're talking about, the big games that are on the anti-siphoning list. The majority of them are Australian only or Australian based sporting events. I think Wimbledon is one of the few exceptions that make it in there, because Aussies often perform well in Wimbledon. So it has to be there. So I think it would be a tough sell to put an international drama / kids show onto the anti-siphoning list, because so many Australians, there would be an amount, but not as many as we would like to think, that would care about it.
The putting Doctor Who behind a paywall, which is what this effectively becomes, given it previously has not been, leaving aside the issue that the ABC now wants you to sign up for iView, does bring up the kind of spectre of people getting it via other means. And of course, there is the free angle in that BBC has its own excellent iPlayer service.
Yes.
How much do you reckon VPN traffic suspiciously coming out of Manchester watching that show is going to spike come November next year.
Is Vertical Hold sponsored by a VPN provider yet?
We're
Not
working
as
on
yet.
it.
We're still waiting for you to get back to us on that whole
Sure.
interstitial ads thing.
Then in that situation, I will say to you, probably heaps, because we would love to encourage that relationship. Look, I think honestly there will be an amount, but again, not the significant amount that we might have seen for other programs. And also, we are still talking about at this stage because we haven't had the back catalogue confirmed. We still are only talking about the 360th anniversary specials and the ongoing series with the new Doctor, Tuti Gatwa, which I think Whovians are hotly anticipating.
Oh, yeah.
However, it's I don't want to be unfair. I think it is a small percent of Australians that would care enough that would want to go and find it via methods other than just going, all right, Disney Plus, you have my money and my attention.
From my experience, and it's been a while since I've tried and written about this stuff, iPlayer is actually pretty tough to break into, even with the VPN. Their geo blocking, their ability to go, okay, we can see that you're using a VPN, we can see that you're not from around here, is much better than what we'll say Netflix's was or Amazon. I found that was the hardest one to break into. It may have changed, but I wouldn't be surprised if people find that just flicking on a VPN and saying I'm in Manchester is not enough.
I mean, I've heard of a guy who might have access to 4 million Australians' details that could probably help you out with regard to that, Adam. But no, you're right. The BBC have done a pretty bang up job on securing iPlayer so that largely only, let's generalize, only Brits can view content via that method.
I would also think, talking about paywalls, though, that, to mix your metaphors, Doctor Who's finally been snapped up by the Borg, right? Now, if you're into sci-fi, you're probably paying for Disney because you probably want to watch Star Wars, you probably want to watch Marvel. So there would be a reasonable overlap there. I'm not saying this justifies it, but there would be a reasonable overlap of people like my household who are saying, well, we're already paying for Disney anyway, so that's a bit of a pain in the ass. But actually, it's better in some ways because when I watch it on iView, it's only in 2-channel sound and I'll get proper 5.1 channel sound and maybe even HDR. And I don't know, do they shoot Doctor Who in 4K? Like, it'll look better on Disney than it will on iView.
I think the relationship that Disney will bring to BBC with this is the expectation that the new episodes, new series probably will be shot in 4K.
Well, then shut up and take my money. Seriously.
Yeah, like nothing would surprise me. It might be too early for the 60th, but I think the new series might lend itself to it because, I mean, Disney have got deep pockets and they would be expecting a high quality product in that regard. I think it will fit really neatly into the Disney library. And it will, if you aren't already a subscriber, and we know that there's a fair few Australians that aren't, I think this is, again, another reason, another plank in the platform that gets you to be so.
I've seen a lot of people comment on this whole, well, they're getting Disney money, it's suddenly going to look a whole lot better. ILM's going to do all the effects and Pixar's going to do recreations and all these wonderful fantasy ideas. And I feel like I have to pour a bit of cold water onto this because the reality here is this is a distribution deal.
Yes.
Disney is buying a show in the same way that, for example, Netflix bought Cobra Kai, which was originally a YouTube Red show way back when.
Yes.
And that's Cobra Kai is produced, if I'm not mistaken, by Sony. And there's a weird tie-in here because the BBC doesn't or isn't going to be producing Doctor Who from now on. That's actually Russell T Davies' company, Bad Wolf, which has a Sony tie-in as well. So quite where that money goes, the BBC is the one that owns the rights. I've not seen anything that's convinced me that said, well, actually, the BBC has to put all this money into Doctor Who specifically. It's probably, you're not wrong, it's not going to want it to look like trash.
Yes.
But it could go, woohoo, there's money that we can put into more seasons of Strictly Come Dancing. Baby, Doctor Who, you're already budgeted for, you're getting what you're getting, make the most of it.
Look, I would absolutely expect that both Russell T Davies and Disney in the distribution deal. But look, Russell's a smart operator. He's an excellent showrunner. I think he absolutely will have been talking to the BBC and said, well, now that you got all of this extra cash because you're selling this product that I'm responsible for making, you've got to give us some love. We've got to do some stuff with it to really bolster the show. And you're right. I don't think it will necessarily change the quality of the special effects, or it might add to the script writing or even some of the casting that plays into it. I think what we will see largely will be a boost in the way in which they film it and make it.
Yeah, it's
Because
got to pay for a couple of 4K cameras.
Disney will want a priority, like a good product in distributing it. They're not just buying it because people love it. It's because they want it to build, because that's what they've expected out of all of the TV shows that they currently run and make on Disney Plus.
I hadn't considered the guest casting thing, and you've given me horror flashbacks to the Doctor Who TV movie and Eric Roberts as the Master. That was appalling.
Oh, mate, imagine what could happen. Anybody from that silly Essex show, or I mean, to the fact that you could get an Anthony Hopkins or anyone.
Brad Pitt.
Right?
Well,
It's enough
maybe
to make me turn.
He's got range.
I don't think we can afford him, Adam. I don't think we can afford him.
Oh, Mr. Sheen. Let's get Martin Sheen on there, please.
I'm so glad you said Martin there. You raised the point, though, that Disney wants numbers out of this ultimately,
Yep.
and it will be able to measure those numbers, which also raises this kind of other great unknown that we don't know how long this deal is for. It's entirely conceivable that in 2 or 3 years, if Doctor Who ain't doing the numbers for Disney Plus, that it says, well, we're not funding any more of it. And then maybe it gets shopped to a different distributor or the BBC takes it over again. We might be looking at a block of Doctor Who that you can only watch on Disney Plus, and then new stuff after that you have to watch somewhere else.
Oh, well, I think because it's a distribution deal, it will reasonably promptly, if they do drop it, allow the BBC to, get it back quickly or do what they need to do so that maybe the ABC could pick it up. What I do think we are going to see out of it, absolutely, is with the nature of the show and how it plays out and what it's going to mean, we have to also remember that Disney Plus are also about to drop a cheaper ad-filled tier to their subscription opportunity. So there's another footprint or another cheaper way for people to get in and watch their Doctor Who, though they will have to put up with pre-roll and mid-roll ads a la Netflix.
If only we discussed this on a recent podcast episode.
I mean, I can't imagine where we talked about that.
Yeah.
Speaking of distribution deals, the big one that we've been talking about literally for years on the podcast is Foxtel having the rights to HBO in Australia. And we've talked about whether eventually HBO will bring their HBO Max product to Australia and go cut out Foxtel, cut out the middleman and go direct. Yep. The head of Foxtel actually had something to say on that the other day, didn't he?
Yeah, Patrick Delaney did come out in an excellent interview. I think it was with Zoe Samios after the Foxtel upfronts last week, and mentioned that, look, to paraphrase Mr. Delaney, with the Foxtel current HBO deal expiring in 2023, that he felt it was inevitable that HBO Max would launch in Australia.
Do we know if there's anything in the HBO deal now that says they've got the full run of House of the Dragon, for example?
It would be unless HBO bought it back from them. All of these kinds of distribution rebroadcast deals work on the fact that if you start a program on your platform, then you have the life of run for that program. It would be very rare for them to have signed only a 1-season deal for the sequel to the biggest show in the world.
So really, they should have done this deal last year.
As in HBO or Foxtel?
HBO should, not Foxtel, God no, but HBO should have done this deal last year because they would have, I would assume, the same problem all around the world. Every market they want to go into where they've licensed this show to somebody else, they then can't go in with this show. The same problem that Netflix had with House of Cards.
I'll be very, very clear, though. Patrick didn't say that HBO Max was coming in 2023. He just said that it was inevitable. So whether that means that Foxtel do re-sign with HBO for another zero's worth of lots of money, and they go, this is really all we can afford and the last time we can do it, or there's some abridged deal that's happening, or heaven forfend, honestly, to Foxtel's great loss, they don't re-sign with HBO, that would be unthinkable given their plans for what they want to do with Binge.
Is the alternate version of this what they've, in fact, recently announced they're doing with WWE, where WWE Network stuff is going to be exclusively on Foxtel from, I think, January next year? Could they do that with HBO Max? Could he mean HBO Max is coming as in HBO Max will be a subset of your Foxtel sub? You'll only be able to get it through us. Because that would keep the relationship going, keep the programs there. Everyone keeps making money. Everybody wins, except the consumer, of course, who has to spend more of that cold, hard cash. But that's business for you.
Can I say it's very possible? Because one of the things that Mr. Delaney spoke about at the Foxtel upfront and made a real point of saying the next big thing in particularly online streaming services and those sorts of things is re-aggregation. So a
Mm.
move away from this splintered kind of I need to have 17 different subscriptions to see everything to here is my single point of entry to a world of content. So he was even suggesting that Binge and KO merge, and that becomes a whole new thing, and you get all of that stuff through there. That could even mean a connection into HBO Max, or the only way to get HBO Max in Australia is a sub subscription, like your Stan Sport, a subscription within a subscription to Binge.
So we're back to the bad old days.
Look, was it ever good?
Well, that's the thing. These are the new bad old days because you've got to pay for 15 different services. But back in the old bad days, you only had to pay one service, but you had to pay a shed load of money for it.
Yeah, look, the challenge is that for all of that content, it's unlikely that Netflix and Disney and Prime Video are going to jump into bed with them.
Hmm.
They would probably say you can, like Amazon do with AMC Plus, although AMC Plus has just launched in Australia. So, but the only way you could get it originally was to subscribe within Amazon Prime Video to see it and Shudder and all of that stuff. Now you can get it on its lonesome.
So the budgets happened this week and EVs have seen some action. So we're joined by Zach Kelly from Gizmodo Australia. Zach, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Hi, guys.
So what is there in the budget that potential EV owners could be excited about?
Well, I think one of the more exciting things that's come out of the budget is this continuation of excitement around a federal charging highway, like a national charging highway. In the budget papers, Labor discussed this plan to construct a 117 fast charging station strong network across Australia's major highways, and they're going to be working with the NRMA on that. And that plan's got about $39.8 million dedicated to it. Apart from that,
Well, actually, Zach, just to interrupt you
Yeah.
on that, because we should slice this apart, I think. 107, as you know, I'm quite optimistic about EVs, but 117 does not sound like a lot when you consider the space and size of Australia. Is it enough? I mean, is it likely to be enough?
I think 117 is a lot, but we're playing relative to the states here. The states have all been very proactive in rolling out charges. Well, most of the states. And I think there's going to be a lot of working with the state governments on that for the ideal positions. These charges are specifically dedicated to like highway and like heavy traffic routes. Well, interstate routes.
So it's almost like a black spot program, but for EV charging.
Pretty much. Oh, well, that's what the assumption is going into it.
So we're making assumptions around this, and I know one of the things you've been passionately writing about in this space is not just the need for electric chargers, but the need for more in a single space. Should a federal government initiative just say, right, well, we'll put one every 200 kilometres along the highways of Western Australia, where I know they're pretty badly needed, but it'll just be the one? Is that going to be enough?
I suspect, well, again, yeah, we're playing with a lot of assumptions here, but I suspect that at the very least, there'll be the charging stations that will be installed will be able to service 2 to 4 cars at any given time. Personally, as someone who has had to queue up at charging stations, while one is currently being used, someone's waiting for that one to be used, and the other charging station is out of order, I don't think charging stations with only 2 spots available are enough. I think state and federal governments should be looking at trying to roll out larger stations with 4 to 6, or maybe more stations available.
So, what else in the budget did they have to talk about? What was the next big bit of EV news from the budget?
The next big bit of EV news is something that I've been a bit skeptical of because I mean, personally, it's something that thinking a little selfishly here, it's not something that I can benefit from, but I can see a lot of people benefiting from it. Definitely. It's this removal of the fringe benefits tax, and this bill that will support it has passed through the lower house. And the idea is that EVs below the luxury car tax will be exempt from the fringe benefits tax, which means slashing the price of EVs by up to $9,000 if they're for a business purpose. because a lot of that it's similar to like how a lot of people buy utes, because there's that they get a bit of a write-off when it comes to them being involved in their business.
So the whole kind of
It's
novated lease and salary sacrifice kind of space, that's where we're talking without getting
pretty
too
much,
accountant.
yeah.
So there's no change in prices for your average punter who's looking to buy one but can't somehow write it off as a work expense.
Yeah, unless they're working as a small business owner with their own business where a car could benefit them.
Yeah.
That's a situation where they could potentially benefit from this. There's also a lot of as an extension of that, and I'm not sure if this part was included in the bill that's been passed through the lower house, but has definitely been attached to it. Is this idea of removing the input tariff, but on EVs, but that's not really something that applies to a lot of EVs right now, because there's a lot of free trade agreements that allow for the easy and cheap import of EVs into the country. So it's not something that is a lot of people going to benefit from. There's only a few handful of cars that could apply to.
So in terms of that cheaper consumer desirable EV, oddly, or it seems to me, one of the ways that this might get pushed along is the fact that the federal government said it's going to kick into, I think it's like 75% of its fleet purchases will be electric within 3 years. That's a pretty rapid timescale, isn't it?
It's an incredibly rapid timescale. 75% of the Commonwealth fleet being electric by 2025 is enormous. And in the papers, they were saying that this was to contribute to a stronger secondhand market. Interestingly, electric vehicles tend to retain their value quite well in the secondhand market at the moment. So I'm hoping that this holds strong, you know?
But
We've,
surely
we've
that's a function of scarcity right now. I mean, that's
of
the
course.
more people want them than there are of them. Whereas if there's a bunch of ex fleet cars out there, in
Mm.
fact, I think we saw this with there was a bunch of BYD electric taxis in Sydney that went up really, really cheap. They were
Well, yeah, I
limited
don't know
in
if
some ways, but
there's a difference between an ex-fleet car and an ex-taxi, though.
but these were actually, so to be clear, these were
I have
taxis.
bought ex-fleet
Adam, to
cars
be
in the
clear,
past.
these
I
were
would
taxis that
not
were never
touch an
used
ex.
as taxis.
Oh, okay, that's
They
different.
they were intended to be taxis. So they got weird paint jobs and stuff, but
That's very different.
they were otherwise okay. Zach, the other thing that they're funding, and this one sits EV adjacent, I guess, is alongside our 117 EV fast charging stations, they're also going to fund hydrogen refueling stations.
So the Hydrogen Highways Initiative is largely, as far as I understand it, it's to help build out this hydrogen highway between Melbourne and Sydney. And that's really interesting to me because there's currently, last time I checked, only 3 hydrogen refueling stations in all of Australia. So this Hydrogen Highways Initiative is, one of the first projects that we're seeing that's actually going to really kick hydrogen into gear. We're also not seeing a lot of hydrogen cars, and I think there's only like 2 consumer level hydrogen cars available anywhere in the world right now. But yeah, I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be a big deal for fleets and freight vehicles, especially. I think hydrogen trucks, which there are plans to build in Australia, are going to benefit from that enormously. But as far as consumer level hydrogen cars are right now, there's not, unfortunately, a lot of enthusiasm at a business level just yet.
Yeah, my understanding was that hydrogen was being largely touted as a transport fuel, your mass haulage kind of thing, because there are challenges around batteries and big trucks. Not that that's not also being somewhat addressed in the EV space, although I guess Toyota would be presumably pretty happy because they've put a lot of money and a lot of work into hydrogen. And I think one of those 3 hydrogen refueling stations, unless I'm very much mistaken, is at Toyota HQ in Melbourne.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. I'm pretty sure too that there are hydrogen vehicles in Australia that one of Australia's governments have rolled out as fleet vehicles. But yeah, it's difficult to get a hydrogen fueled vehicle right now. Like, I'd be surprised if you could even get one imported in Australia, let alone be able to drive it.
So, considering that we've had a change of government who is a bit more open to the concepts like EVs, are you happy with this budget, Zach, or do you think they've missed the mark? Do you think they could have done more?
it's not really like the way I see it. There's a lot that I could wish for. Like I wish EVs were cheaper. I wish they were less expensive to run. I wish they didn't have such a big impact on the environment to build. But I think the biggest thing that a government can do right now is introduce fuel efficiency standards. And if part of the budget went towards that, I'd be more happy than I currently am. But for the moment, I'm pretty happy in saying that a lot of the mechanisms that have been touted in the budget, the fringe benefits tax thing and the government fleet thing, they are going to contribute to a secondhand market, which means someone like me one day will be able to afford an EV, and that that has me excited.
Compare it to what we've seen with solar panels in Australia, which we're going to chat about in a minute. And between federal rebates and state rebates, you could basically, halve the price of a solar installation. I
Mm.
couldn't see governments, halving the cars of EVs, but do you think that halving the price of EVs, but do you think that they'll do more to go along that road of what they've done with solar, or do you think they'll leave it a bit more to market forces?
I think as far as incentives and rebates go, we've seen overseas countries start to float the idea of removing those rebate schemes because they were originally introduced to try and spark just uptake to begin with. Going forward, I'm not sure if they're going to be a big part of it because the technology is generally going to get cheaper anyway.
Okay, well, I suppose we will have to wait and see which bits of this budget, in fact, get passed and whether or not all of this comes to pass. But thanks, as always, for your time, Zach.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And as always, and you've now been a guest on the show, so you should know what's coming your way. It's time for you to face the vertical hold 3 questions of doom. I will ask all 3 questions, and you may answer them in any order you like, as I always say. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our topical contentious question du jour, who's the best actor who ever played Doctor Who?
Awesome. You can find me on Gizmodo Australia. Any article that has Zachariah Kelly on it is my work. You can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @ZachariahK_. And my favorite actor to play the Doctor, or my favorite actor who I wish could be the Doctor.
Both.
Both. Why not go for both?
Okay, my favorite actor who played the Doctor was David Tennant. I love David Tennant so much. And my favorite actor who I think could play the Doctor, I'm honestly not sure about that. But you've given me something to think about.
We always like to leave our guests thinking. That's what we always say, isn't it, Adam?
More like wondering, I think.
Possibly that. Thanks so much for your time, Zach.
No worries. Thank you.
So, solar power is not a topic we've tackled a great deal here on Vertical Hold, but it is a technology topic. And we're joined by Mariam Gabaji, the senior utilities writer at Finder. Mariam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, there's a lot of enthusiasm, and certainly I see a lot of advertising around solar power for consumers these days, largely tied into this idea that power prices either are rising or they're about to rise. How accurate are those predictions in terms of power price rises, do you think?
Ah, they're more than accurate. We've already seen in July power prices being raised by up to 18%, and now it's predicted to go up to 22% by the end of the year, another 30% next year as well as gas prices by 44% over the next 2 years. So yeah, we're in for a bit of a bill shock.
So how does that change the economics for someone who's sort of been teetering on the edge of, do I want to get solar or not? How much of a difference is that going to make to their calculations?
I think it depends on how high the bills are now going to come out to be. So when you're thinking about, I had a friend who had a $400 energy bill, and that's jumped up to like $900 after he's moved to another house. Initially, the return on investment wasn't that great, but now it's like you really have to consider what your energy bills are, how much the upfront costs are, and you've got a lot of lenders in the space as well offering green loans to help you with the upfront costs. So I think a lot more people who can afford to get solar will be thinking about it.
It's one of those topics, the limited amount that I have written about this, though, that is very, very complicated because it differs like state by state. You've got different rules on who your energy providers can be. And in some states, I think it's even literally there's one and you're just going through them no matter what. How does that affect the solar value equation? Do you need to not only shop around for getting your solar panels put in, but also then who the power is going to or coming from?
Yeah, you definitely do. So I think the biggest thing is you need to invest in good solar panels, right? If you cheap out on it, you're just going to be almost wasting your money because they might break down. You might have to replace them. The maintenance costs will be too high. So then you have to look for credited solar retailers who can help you get premium solar panels. But then again, it goes back to having lenders who help you out with those financial costs. So, for example, you've got AGL that's partnered up with Plenty recently. AGL offers a solar bundle, so you can get solar panels and solar batteries as well. And via Plenty, you get an interest-free loan to help you with your costs. So it definitely pays to shop around as well.
Are there catches you need to watch out for if you're going with a bundle deal or if you're going with a deal that's from your electricity provider?
That all comes down to doing your research and seeing what the price differences are between providers as well. Whether it's better to go with an energy retailer or someone who solely does solar.
In the early days of thinking about solar, the feed-in tariff played a large factor in your return on investment. Now that's continues to head south, but as the price of power jumps up, should the feed-in tariff go up as well? Does that seems only fair?
Well, you'll have back in the day, you had let's take South Australia for example. You know, when people, when retailers wanted people to install solar panels, the feed-in tariffs were up to what 44 cents per kilowatt per hour, and that was really high. And now
Mm.
that's gone down to about anywhere between 4 and 10 cents. Um, it's with more renewable energy coming into the grid and less demand from the grid to get that renewable energy, we're not going to see feed-in tariffs go back to where they once were. That's just yeah. I think those are those days are long gone.
So it's not something that you should really be banking on in your equations. It's more what you do with the power rather than what you're going to get for selling it back.
Yeah, I think that's where people are considering going off grid. So I think there's going to be a big push towards getting solar batteries so that you can store your power. Obviously, the upfront costs are really high, about $1,000 per kilowatt per hour, but that's where things are headed.
So the economics of batteries, that's one of those endlessly debated topics. And certainly, and again, anecdotally, I've got a relative who was getting solar installed and got advised not to get a battery yet because the money didn't make sense. What kind of time, or I suppose, what kind of bill level do you need to be hitting for that kind of battery investment to pay off?
Yeah, I think um, don't have the math
Hmm.
on hand with me, but it would have to be pretty high for you because I think I was reading up on this, and your battery life will last about 15 years. So if your bill isn't high enough to start with, and you get the solar battery, by the time it the returns of investment start to kick in, it might be time for a new battery as well. So I think we're all just waiting around for the costs of using solar to go down as well.
And that's one of the complications that the more you invest in things, the more like if once you've got solar panels, a battery actually becomes less attractive because your bills drop so much that getting a battery is not going to save you as much as it would have before. So what looks like a good idea may not be once you crunch the numbers.
Yeah, I think it honestly varies from household to household. It might not make sense for smaller households, but it might make sense for larger households that just use a lot of energy and would benefit from going off grid.
When you say off grid, though, a battery and off grid are not the same thing, are they? Because you can, when you get a battery, that doesn't mean you can't still buy power from the grid when you have to. But going off grid means that you're totally relying on that battery.
That is true. This happens like I think when we I think this was around July, June or July, when there were fears of blackouts as well, because obviously just the national electricity market couldn't cope with like the high prices, and there was just a lot of chaos, and a lot of people were considering the option of being off grid because then you wouldn't be relying on power that was coming through. Of course, having a battery doesn't mean you necessarily have to go off grid the entire time, but it would help during those instances.
But if you wanted to go off grid, then your battery would need to be big enough to cope
Yeah.
with your peak load, which means you're buying a lot of battery when you most of the time don't need that much battery. Whereas when you keep the battery, you're using the grid occasionally, but it means you don't have to invest in that extra battery for the worst possible days.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's how it all comes down to just your household. But it's great that this time during the budget, for instance, they've promised a lot more investment for clean energy transition. It's just that we're not going to see the benefits in the short period. It'll be 5-10 years down the line. And I think over the next couple of years, you have no choice but to deal with high energy costs. And solar isn't something that everyone can afford to get because the latest AER reports show that there are a lot of people who are in $400 of energy debt already to their retailer. So it might not be an option at all.
So, actually, speaking of energy debt, and a slight question without notice, I noticed you've also written about the energy regulator looking into new frameworks around consumer protections recently. What are they looking for there? I mean, what kind of protections do consumers need that they don't already get?
I think it starts with we always assume that people know how to read their energy bills. They know how to look for the best deals. But there are a lot of people who, aren't tech savvy, who don't know how to keep searching for the best deals every 6 months, every 12 months, which is what you'll need to eventually do. We've already seen some energy retailers close up shop. And I wouldn't be surprised if, that trend sort of follows when prices start going up in the next 2 years as well. So I think it's just giving out that information and then taking the burden off the energy retailer slightly as well to help these customers out, because that itself adds into the cost that eventually gets passed down to the customer.
I noticed in the budget there was also something about solar for rental properties. Is that sort of the big last frontier for solar in Australia?
I think that's always the struggle, right? You have 3 million plus households with solar, but the renters are missing out. What could help is that I think the government's investing about 224 million to deploy community batteries that could then help households that are renting or those who are living in social housing to be able to access that renewable energy at a cheaper cost.
So, the environmental factors here are pretty obvious in terms of decarbonisation. But I'm curious if there's been much in the way, and if you know if there's been much in the way of a shift in terms of solar panel technology. Obviously, over time, it has become more affordable. The cost of panels has dropped, and you did note the really cheap ones might not be worth bothering with. But is there new stuff in solar panels? Are there new ways to deploy them that people might not be aware of?
So right now, you've got hundreds of researchers in Australia working on ways to reduce the cost of the solar panels and just all of that, right? I think majority of your solar panels are silicon based, and that's the second most abundant material on Earth. So it's just easier to use it, and it's got a longer lasting life as well. They're trying to complement that with another material, and that's where the work is going on, where you will be able to take advantage of more sunlight, even more so than silicon itself. And then you've got other things. I think with solar, you need to understand that everything has to happen at a larger scale as well. Just installing solar panels isn't it. So you've got we recently had held the Find Innovation Awards, and Raygen was the winner in the solar category for innovation. And what they're doing is pretty cool because they use water-based storage, which means that the energy generated from the solar panels will be stored via hydropower, and it could last for hours and even days, and that could help give energy to the grid, which is great, especially as more coal power plants are being decommissioned even 10 years ahead of time.
Cool. Taking it back, I suppose, to the household scale, and for people who are considering this, are there any other pitfalls apart from cheap panels and so on for solar power that first-time users might not think about?
I think it's about just doing the maths as well, and that's where you've got your accredited solar panel installers that are accredited by the government can help you give that information as well. So you can access sometimes just to access solar rebates and concessions, you actually have to go through a workshop in order to get them, which means you'll be told what kind of solar panels to install, how much capacity your household might need. Um, and it's just, yeah, it just comes down to doing your research.
The one thing that I would add to that from my experience and my experience helping my mother-in-law get solar as well is don't assume the installers are competent, especially when it comes to shade, because shade is the real solar killer. Not just the panels in full shade, so it's not getting any sun, but there is a bit of a shadow being cast across one of the panels or part of the panels, and that's enough to bring the whole thing down. And I noticed that when they did my roof, they totally ignored a satellite dish and a couple of things that were on the roof, and I had to notice that and tell them to move them. When they did my mother-in-law's house, they were going to put the solar panels on the north side of her house right down along the gutter, totally ignoring the fact that to the north of her was a 2-story house. And I had to tell the installers, no, this is stupid, move them up, 6 feet and do a row across the top of the roof. And now she gets great performance out of it. But if we hadn't have looked at that, it would have been a terrible outcome. So yeah, don't assume that they're looking after all that. You need to look around and ask a few questions.
Yeah, 100% couldn't agree more. And I think that's what stops people sometimes from getting solar as well. Just that access to information as well, and just understanding the entire process. But it just starts with looking at people around you that have installed solar, because they can help through their experience as well, and just talking to the right people.
Okay, well, thanks for coming into the studio today, Mariam. Now, you're a first-time guest on the show, so you don't know what's coming. The vertical hold 3 questions of doom, but not too much to be worried about. I will ask you all 3 questions in order, and then you can answer them in any order that you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media, if you're on social media? And our new big, contentious but topical question of the week: who's the best actor to have ever played Doctor Who? And if you don't watch Doctor who should play the next Doctor Who?
Cool. So I don't watch Doctor Who at all. So who's the first person? I'm just gonna say the first person that comes to my mind, because I don't also watch a lot of movies. But Brad Pitt. I read books. Sorry to anyone who watches Doctor Who. That is an awful answer. I 100% agree.
Brad Pitt could pull that off. The man's
I
got
think
range.
Brad Pitt might be beyond the show's budget.
A little bit.
Yeah, you can find my work on finder.com.au. Just search for my profile there, and you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time. Well, that just about wraps up this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Zach and Mariam for joining us, and for Steve for breaking into the studio to join us.
Wait, I'm still here?
Steve, you're still here. You haven't escaped in the TARDIS yet. And it's time, as they say, once again, for you to face up to the patented Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. I will ask all 3 questions. You may answer them in any order you like. I'm sure you already know this.
Come on.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question: who is the best actor to play Doctor Who?
Wow. Okay. I'm at Steve Molk everywhere that counts. And you can find some of my rantings at tvblackbox.com.au, at TV_Blackbox on Twitter, or TV Blackbox on Instagram, on Facebook, all of those other places. There's some really great content pumping out now, particularly because it's upfront season. So we have all of that covered for everybody. my favourite actor who has played the Doctor, Alex. It is one that is a contentious response, but absolutely to this point, Christopher Eccleston.
Oh, I thought you were going to go real out there and say John Hurt.
See, real out there is Joanna Lumley.
True. That's
True.
a fair.
And reverse of the question, who hasn't played the Doctor yet and should?
Oh, jeepers. I mean, the lazy answer is Meryl Streep because she could do anything. Look, I think it would be marvelous. Quite seriously, it would be marvelous to see an Australian actor play the Doctor for a couple of seasons.
So Jason
You want me to
Donovan
say
as the
who?
Doctor?
I think that we've got some pretty amazing performers, and I would even put it out there that even somebody like Briggs would be a great Doctor.
Interesting choice. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And as always, thanks everyone for dropping by, even those who broke into the studio. Thanks for all your great reviews. Thanks for helping us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
I mean, we could even say the.
No spoilers. I'm cutting that out.
Are you serious? It's literally been 5 days.
I'm cutting that out. Yes, I'm cutting that out. I'm that anally
All right.
retentive.
Well,
But leave this bit in where you say you're cutting it out and just cut it out.
Totally.